Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, December 5th, 2019. And here are our top stories. Planning for the next generation of state and local government employees, and a closer look at the funded status of many of America's public pension plans. Well, unemployment remains historically low, and that's great for many Americans, but it's also presenting challenges for state and local governments when it comes to hiring new employees. Here to discuss this and a lot more, Gerald Young. He's a senior retirement associate with the Center for State and Local Government Excellence. Gerald, always a pleasure to see you. How are you?
Oh, doing very well. Thank you, Jeffrey.
And awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I know we want to talk a little about a recent workforce study that the center did. Why don't you kind of walk us through a little bit, give us some of the high points?
Sure. Well, we've done workforce studies every year since about 2009, surveying state and local human resource directors to get their take on what's going on in their organizations. And really what challenges they're facing, how they're adapting to those challenges. And, obviously post-recession, we saw some significant challenges and some significant cutbacks in terms of layoffs or hiring freezes and things like that. But even today, with unemployment as low as it is, we're still seeing quite a range of positions that are very hard to fill. And that's, I think, both due to the nature of those positions and also to the competition that they face with the private sector.
Yeah, that's obviously, from my point of view, very disconcerting because obviously government, local government especially, serves a very important role. Do you have a feeling for what types of positions? Can you share that? Are they police, firefighter, emergency personnel, perhaps? Or, can you tell us a little bit more?
Some of them are police and fire, and that's definitely concerning because that's typically been the type of position that there is a almost a cultural mindset with the people that go into those fields that they want to be working in those public service arenas. But there are also a number of positions that much more directly compete with the private sector, such as IT positions, healthcare, engineering. And I think for obvious reasons, when you can find an engineering position that might pay more in the private sector, you might be more likely to go for that opportunity rather than choose or remain in the public sector.
And that's, IT obviously very important. Cybersecurity is a huge issue both for private sector, but also public sector. We need those folks to come work in the public sector as well. Do you have a feeling or an idea of, we've talked in the past about, and we're going to talk in the next segment about pensions, so I don't want to spill too much about that, but the benefits, typically public sector benefits, you don't necessarily make the wage that you do in the private sector, but the defined benefit plan, the healthcare. Would some of that be, maybe cutting back some of that be a rationale for why maybe these jobs are not filled?
It certainly can be, and we can talk further about pensions more specifically, but I think looking at salaries versus benefits, it's only about half of organizations that see themselves as being competitive strictly on a salary basis. It's, I think, a little bit more constrained not only by budgets, but also by the fact that there is a compensation plan that is in place, and it's very difficult to stray from that. Benefits, obviously, premiums with healthcare plans vary annually.
Right.
But you also have a little bit more flexibility in terms of some of the non-cash benefits that you might offer to your employees. And that's something that I think gives public sector employers a little bit of advantage, not only in being able to, again, put cash on the table. That's always great if you can, but in terms of flexibility, whether that's, providing for different work schedules, or some of the mentoring or onboarding and succession planning that go into making sure that somebody joining an operation is going to be not only successful at it, but motivated by it.
Yeah.
And
Oh, go ahead. I'm
that's
sorry.
really, sorry, that really seems to be the key advantage that public sector employers have when they can market that effectively, is that there is a public service impact that their employees can have. And if that is marketed correctly and supported in those individuals who come to work for the organization, then they feel a great sense of satisfaction in being able to serve the public.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let me ask you a question about, typically workers who work for public sector will stay for a long period of time. I mean, I have known many public sector workers to stay 15, 20 years. They obviously stay because of the public service, but also the pension, some of the benefits. What about this younger generation? Even people in my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, people move around. They have multiple careers. They may start in as a school teacher or EMT and then move off. Is that presenting a challenge for human resource directors around the country in public sector?
Right. I don't know that it's so much a generational change. However, it can be a matter of communication and support. And a couple of examples that I might give you, when people are joining an operation, there can be this thinking that onboarding is a process that takes place over 1 or 2 days, and then you're done. And then you get down to business, and presumably you are a self-motivated, driven employee, and you'll do everything that you need to do. But where public sector employers are finding that they're most effective lately is that they make that onboarding process 6 months, a year, whatever it might be, not necessarily to spoon feed those employees, but to bring them more fully into the organization. Some of the rural health and human services employers that we've been working with and doing some case studies on have noted that they find that the employees that they bring in, let's say it's a social worker in a small rural county, might be one of only 1 or 2 social workers in that organization. And they may, as a result, feel a little bit isolated. Mm-hmm. But if they can help them to network with other social service providers, even outside the county operation, and feel much more connected to peers in the area, then they feel a little bit more supported in that role, that they have people that they can look to for advice or getting acclimated. And even where it's not that type of assistance, it might be that, let's say you have a planner who comes on in a local organization, and they have the ability to do some rotations to other departments. They may find that even if they don't have a clear career ladder within the department that they landed in initially, that there are opportunities to expand and grow in their skills, or even have some support for continuing education while they continue to work in some capacity or another with that public employer. And that again helps them to feel that they have the opportunity to stay with them.
And what I'm hearing from some of the examples you gave, Gerald, is that there's almost like a need to adopt some of the private sectors, because what you're describing to me is very similar to what a lot of private sector companies or not-for-profit organizations do. That ability to cross-train, that ability to interact throughout the corporate culture or the organizational culture is very important, so that you're not just functionalized and doing one job. I mean, if you're just doing one thing for your entire career, I think that would be very boring, perhaps. And if for people who want to develop and grow, having these opportunities to go outside and learn about different programs and take those skills into your skills actually make you a better employee.
Right. Right. And particularly as you're looking at folks who are retiring, if a new employee comes into the organization and perceives, rightly or wrongly, that the successor to that individual has already been chosen, or there's some assumption that they have been, they are not going to feel the motivation to aspire to that position. Whereas if in onboarding those new staff, you make them a part of that ongoing employee development, you may find that no, they don't succeed to the assistant director position 1 year later, but perhaps through some route within the organization or another, they continue to grow and to learn and to take on greater leadership responsibilities.
Yeah, that's really astute. And, you know, that in terms of need, I mean, you talked earlier in the segment about engineers, technology. What are some of the biggest needs throughout the country? Because, you know, you look at just living here in New Jersey and in the New York area, the roads obviously need some work. No offense to the road workers out there in New Jersey. You guys do a great job and gals do a great job. But there are obviously a lot of infrastructure challenges, I guess is my point, throughout the country. Are there specific needs, doctors, EMTs, technologists that you can point to in the survey?
Yes, you know, aside from the positions that I mentioned earlier, you know, talking about infrastructure, maintenance workers have significant demand right now, as well as skilled tradespeople. Yeah. You know, again, if you have the ability to be a welder or a carpenter or an electrician, you know, you have various opportunities available to you. And it may be that in looking for some of those individuals, governments have to be creative in terms of how they bring them into the organization. It may be that they are continuing some of their education or certification as they're on the job. It might be that they look to more of a gig workforce to, you know, find somebody on a short-term basis who's not necessarily a full-time employee initially, but who may grow into a full-time employee at some time.
Yeah, a lot of adaptation has to happen even for public sector. Gerald, just stick around, and when we come back, we'll talk to Gerald about pensions, always a hot topic, so stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. You know, America's public pensions have been the center of discussion for quite some time. Here to join us to give us the latest data, Gerald Young. He's a senior retirement associate for the Center of State and Local Government. Gerald, thanks so much for sticking around this morning.
Certainly.
So let's shift gears. We had a great conversation about workforce and some of the needs of our public sector friends to hire within the workforce. Pensions, always an issue, always something that is talked about. And I think starting our show off with workforce and compensation, very important to provide the context. What can you tell us about the latest research you have on public pensions?
Well, Public pensions do play a significant role in workforce. It's not just a part of compensation, but it's something that really helps to value those workers and provide for an option for retirement down the road. And again, it is a really strong component of what motivates them to stay until they reach vesting within the plan, and have that assurance that they have some benefit provided for them and their dependents down the road. I think the challenges that we've seen in pensions in the last few years have primarily been economy related. With the recession, the funded level of pension funds declined significantly, and really, whereas let's say 20 years ago, most pension funds were fully funded, right now it's more tiered. There are some that are approaching full funding. There are some that are in the, let's say, 75% range. And there's another, maybe a third of public pension funds that are more like 55% funded. And the issue that they're facing is that there is a actuarial determined contribution that should be put into those pension funds each year to make sure that they approach that full funding again. Some of those pension funds are contributing at that level, some are not. And it's really having those funds available and put in at the correct times that allows for the value of the assets to drive the interest income that can be earned. So the more delay there is in putting those funds in, the less money there is for the retirees.
Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing issue, and we just had news out of Chicago or Illinois, I should say, that they're consolidating, I think, about 650 police and firefighter pensions. So that's a way to kind of bridge the gap and combine assets. And I guess by pooling, you get some economies of scale there. But you look around the country, I mean, this is something that comes up a lot. And it's something that state legislators and the executive branch have to, and also the administrators have to figure out. One thing I wanted to ask you, something that just popped in my head, Gerald. The birth rate in this country is very low relative to what we've had in the past, and does that have an impact on actuarially? I'm not asking you to be an actuary, but I mean, does that have an impact on hiring and also pension prognostication and making sure that the pension's in good state?
Yes, it certainly can. When we look at pension funds and their funding balances, sometimes it's a matter of what they're earning on their investments. Sometimes it's a matter of what they're putting into those funds. But it also depends upon the demographics of their beneficiaries.
Yeah.
That can be a factor of the age of the employees in the organization. As we discussed a little bit earlier, there's a wave of retirements going on. You have actuaries who are looking at the age of those employees, but also looking at other demographics such as the life expectancy of the beneficiaries themselves. So if it's being observed that in a particular cohort, let's say it's the police and fire field, their life expectancy may vary from the life expectancy of general employees, and it may vary by state as well. So every one of those plans, as they look at their actuarials, is finding that likewise impacts their long-term planning.
How attuned are so you've got these big state plans that I think the state legislators really focus on, and unfortunately you hear a lot of stuff in the news, some right, some wrong. But these local governments, the town of XYZ, or the smaller cities, the villages, the special taxing districts, those folks have a lot on their plate. I mean, how much does the pension percentage-wise take up of the conversations that they're having day to day? I mean, I got to think that this is, in some levels, very consuming of city councils and town organizations.
Well, and that's one of the areas that we've been doing some research just this year. And that was on the fact that very often what happens with pensions is that since they are a benefit that is paid in the future, it can be easy to put off the discussion on those until the future, which just makes it a bigger problem to deal with down the road. And it's also something that, as you say, they have a lot on their plates. If they have a big discussion about pensions, it may be perceived to be, whew, we got through that. Now we can go on and deal with other issues, and we can ignore pensions for a couple more years. One of the areas that has been tried in a number of states is to go through and put in place some variable pension arrangements so that rather than saying that the legislature or the city council or whoever the administrators are have to keep that day-to-day or month-to-month, year-to-year focus on the pension issues, they can put in place certain thresholds for action so that whether it's a change in the actuarial data, whether it's a change in the investment income that they're earning, or whether it's maybe just not reaching yet the funded ratio that they would like to be at, they can program in algorithms that say, you know what, if this happens, then we will make the following changes either in the benefits or the contributions. And those may be changes that are, let's say, related to COLAs, to say that, the cost of living adjustment might be within this range, but the exact amount of that will depend upon these other conditions. Or it may be that, again, let's say that the funded ratio remains lower than they would like. They may say, if that's the case, and if it's in this range, then the employer and potentially the employee would make up with some additional contribution until such time as you get back to the level that you'd like to be at. And I think there's certainty that people know what might happen down the road. It's not a matter of going into a huge pension discussion 5 years after your last one and not knowing what course of action is going to be taken. You know that your benefit or your contribution may vary somewhat, but it's not going to be a huge number, or that that if this is going on in the economy or your actuarials, that this might follow. But it also spreads some of the risk involved so that the employers, the employees, and the retirees all have both an understanding of what those risks are and an understanding of potentially what their role is in bearing that risk.
It's certainly different, perhaps a different practice. Obviously, pension conversations don't just end with the funding in year one. So a lot to talk about. Gerald, always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight into workforce and pensions, and we'll have you back on the show very soon.
Great. And yes, if there's anybody who's interested in further details on the research, it's all at slge.org.
Absolutely. Gerald, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest that you think we should interview? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement markets, personal finance, technology, so much more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, and that's Friday, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.